I thought I had a pretty good handle on Iceland.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you scroll through Instagram and it feels like you've seen it all. The waterfalls, the black sand beaches, the influencers in those bright yellow raincoats standing on that crashed airplane.
It's very photogenic.
It is. But it feels almost packaged, like a theme park for geology geeks.
That's a good way to put it. It does have that reputation, but that's really just the surface.
Exactly, and that's why I was so interested in this stack of sources you brought in. Because when I started reading through these, I mean, we've got government energy reports, folklore archives, technical driving manuals, even policy papers from Airbnb, I realized I had absolutely no idea how this country actually works.
That's the thing about Iceland. The postcard version completely hides the mechanics. We are talking about a nation that sits just below the Arctic Circle, yet somehow manages to house the northernmost banana plantation in the world.
Okay, we have to talk about that because my brain just refuses to accept Arctic bananas as a real thing.
Oh, it's very real. But it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. When you really dig into these documents, you find a nation that is constantly negotiating its own survival.
And not just against the weather.
No, not at all. They're negotiating with volcanoes, with global housing markets, and according to these sources, they are literally negotiating with elves.
Actual elves.
We will get to the elves. But the mission for this deep dive is to look past the scenery. We want to understand the system. I mean, how do you power a modern society when your primary energy source is, well, melting? How do you manage a fishery so it doesn't collapse? And seriously, why is there a strict law about getting naked before you go swimming?
The naked swimming rule is fascinating, but let's start with the bananas. That just seems like the most impossible fact in the whole stack. I assumed everything in Iceland that wasn't like a fish or a sheep had to be imported.
That's the common assumption. But if you go to the Agricultural University of Iceland in the Veröldridi, you'll find these greenhouses, and they're producing about a ton of bananas every year. A ton. Now, to be clear, they aren't shipping these to Whole Foods or anything. It's mostly for the students and staff there. But it's a proof of concept.
So how are they doing it? Is it just really, really good insulation?
It's the fire part of fire and ice. It's entirely geothermal. They just use the heat bubbling up from the ground to keep those greenhouses tropical year-round.
Yeah.
But if you want to see the industrial scale of this, you have to look at Friheimar.
That's the tomato place, right?
That's the tomato place. Friheimar is a massive operation. They're pumping out 2 tons of tomatoes every single...
2 tons a day.
And the way they do it is by piping in geothermal water that is 95 degrees Celsius, that's over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. They grab it from a borehole just 200 meters away.
So they basically have boiling water on tap from the earth.
Exactly. And they've built this whole ecosystem around it. They use imported bees for pollination, biological pest controls instead of pesticides. They've even turned it into a tourist destination where you can drink tomato beer inside the greenhouse.
I am still not sold on tomato beer, but the energy aspect is it's undeniable. This abundance of hot water basically solves their whole heating problem.
It solves the heating problem, yes. But here is where we need to distinguish between heat and electricity.
Okay.
Because while geothermal heats the homes, a huge chunk of their electricity comes from hydropower, so rivers, spinning turbines. And this is where that research paper from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University drops a massive reality check.
I read that part and I was a bit confused. It talks about the glaciers melting, which is obviously bad for the planet. But for a hydropower plant, isn't melting ice just more fuel?
For now, yes. And that's the paradox. Iceland's grid is, effectively 100% renewable.
Right.
But because of climate change, the glaciers are melting faster than they have in centuries.
So the dams are full.
They are overflowing. The paper notes that right now they're experiencing a melt boom. There is so much runoff that they have more potential energy than they know what to do with. But think of it like a battery. If you have a battery and you puncture it, you might get a massive surge of energy out of it very quickly. But you aren't generating new energy. You are just draining the storage.
Ah, I see. They're cashing out their savings account.
Precisely. The projections in the report are stark. This flow rate is going to peak, and then somewhere between 2050 and 2080, it falls off a cliff. The glaciers literally disappear. The battery runs dry.
That is a terrifying timeline.
Yep.
2050 is not that far away. So the very thing fueling their green reputation is vanishing because the planet is getting hotter.
It forces a question that almost no other country has to ask. What happens when your renewable energy source simply ends? They are riding a wave that is destined to crash.
Wow. That's a heavy existential crisis to have hanging over your head. Let's maybe pivot to something a little more social, although I guess social in Iceland has its own set of rules, the swimming pools.
It's impossible to overstate how important the pools are. In December 2025, UNESCO actually added Icelandic pool culture to its intangible cultural heritage list.
The sources call it the social commons, or even the pub of Iceland.
That's the best analogy. Alcohol's very expensive in Iceland. So you don't go to a bar to hang out after work, you go to the local pool. The stats show 79% of the population visits regularly. But what's fascinating is this equalizer effect that the sociology papers talk about.
How does that work?
It's simple. In a meeting room, you know who the boss is. You see the suits, the watches, all the status symbols.
Right.
But when you strip everyone down to a swimsuit and put them in 40-degree water, those markers disappear. You have the CEO sitting next to the fisherman, sitting next to the school teacher. And they were all just complaining about the weather.
But to get into that tub, you have to get past the shower police.
Yes, the shower rule. It's the one thing that terrifies tourists. You must shower with soap completely naked before you put on your swimsuit.
Why are they so strict about the naked part?
It all comes down to chemistry and trust. Icelandic pools use very, very low levels of chlorine because they want to keep the water feeling natural. They can only do that if the people entering the water are genuinely clean. If you try to shower with your swimsuit on, you aren't cleaning the parts that need cleaning.
So it's a social contract.
Exactly. If you don't wash properly, you are essentially disrespecting the entire community's water. It's considered incredibly rude.
Speaking of respect and hidden rules, we have to talk about the neighbors you can't see. The Huldufolk. The hidden people.
The elves.
The elves. Now, usually when you hear about folklore, it's a fun story for the gift shop. But looking at these sources, specifically the infrastructure reports, it seems like the elves have actual legal standing in Iceland.
It's not quite that they have a seat in parliament, but they definitely influence urban planning. A 2007 survey showed that over half of Icelanders wouldn't deny the existence of elves.
Over half.
And that belief translates into real-world consequences. We have the case of Alfhall Road in Kópavogur.
The Elf Hill Road.
Right. If you look at the map, the road narrows and curves, specifically to avoid this one large rock. The local belief is that this rock is an elf home. In the 90s, they tried to move it.
And what happened?
The machinery kept breaking down, drills failed, engines stalled. It became so problematic that they just gave up and paved around it.
Wow.
And this isn't just ancient history. There was a bridge project in 2025 where they brought in a specialist in Huldufólk communication.
A consultant, like a mediator.
Exactly. The specialist reported back that the elves were sympathetic to the project and agreed to move temporarily so the bridge could be built.
I have to ask, do the engineers actually believe this, or is it just about keeping the public happy?
I think if you look at it through the lens of our sources, it's not that every civil engineer literally believes in little people living in rocks. It serves as an environmental metaphor.
A metaphor for what?
It functions as a check on human arrogance. It forces developers to pause. You can't just bulldoze through a landscape because you feel like it. You have to consider who or what might already be there. It's a way of saying, we are not the only masters of this land.
That's a really beautiful way to look at it. It's about humility. But sometimes respecting the land also means figuring out how to extract a living from it. And historically, for Iceland, that meant fish.
Fish is the absolute engine of the economy, and we have a fascinating history here, starting with the herring adventure.
This sounded like a gold rush story.
It really was. In the 1930s, places like Djúpavik were absolute boom towns. They built a massive herring factory there, the first fully automated factory in Europe. They were processing thousands of barrels. It was just money printing.
And then?
Then the 1950s hit, and the herring just vanished. Overfishing, changing ocean currents, it all led to a total collapse. Djúpavik went from a bustling hub to a ghost town almost overnight.
I saw a note that the abandoned factory was used to film Justice League.
It was.
So you have Ben Affleck as Bruce Wayne recruiting Aquaman in the ruins of the Icelandic herring industry.
Which is a perfect pop culture footnote.
Yeah.
But the real lesson Iceland took from that collapse was that they could not let it happen again. Not with cod. Cod is the gold standard.
This brings us to the ITQ system, the individual transferable quota. Now, this sounds like really dry regulatory jargon, but reading the case study, this looks like the moment Iceland decided to turn its ocean into a stock market.
That is the perfect analogy. Before 1990, fishing was a race to fish. The government set a total limit for the year, and every boat went out screaming, trying to catch as much as they could before the whistle blew. It was dangerous, inefficient, and the fish stocks were plummeting.
So how did the ITQ change things?
They sliced up the pie. The government said, okay, we're not just setting a total limit. We're giving you specifically the right to catch 1% of that limit. That 1% is yours. You can catch it in January, you can catch it in July,
Okay.
or you can sell it.
You can sell your right to fish?
Yes. It transformed the right to fish into a tradable asset. And purely on a biological level, it was a miracle. The cod stocks recovered. Efficiency went through the roof because people stopped racing.
But I'm sensing a however coming.
A big one. The initial quotas were given out based on past performance, the so-called grandfather rights. If you were a big trawler who caught a lot in the 80s, you got a big slice. If you were a small family boat, you got crumbs.
And since the quotas are tradable...
The big fish ate the little fish, literally and financially. The large companies bought up the quotas from the small villagers. So suddenly you have entire coastal towns that have lost their legal right to fish in their own waters simply because the local quota was sold off to a conglomerate in Reykjavik.
So it saved the fish, but it gutted the villages.
Precisely. And that emptiness in the villages created a vacuum that is now being filled by the next boom, tourism.
And we have a policy paper from Airbnb here that addresses this. It seems like there's a huge clash happening.
It's a classic tension. You have South Iceland, which has a population of maybe 35,000 residents, but they are hosting 2 million visitors a year. The locals are feeling the strain. Ambulances are busy with tourists, roads are clogged, housing prices are skyrocketing.
And Airbnb is arguing they aren't the villains in this story.
They're pushing back hard. Their data shows they only make up about 0.5% of the housing stock in the major cities. Their argument is, don't blame us for the housing crisis, blame high interest rates, and the fact that you aren't building enough new homes.
But they also propose something interesting, this European fund for rural tourism.
Right. Their strategy is basically, let's get these tourists out of the city. If they can incentivize people to stay in those rural villages, the ones that lost their fishing quotas, maybe tourism can save the towns that fishery policy destroyed.
It's a cycle. Herring, cod, tourists, they're just swapping one resource for another.
And just like fishing, tourism requires navigating the physical landscape. Which brings us to this driving guide.
Oh man, the F-roads. I've rented cars in Europe before. Usually, the biggest worry is a stick shift. This manual. This is a survival guide.
It is. The EP stands for Freilvegur, or mountain road. And the first rule is that you must have a 4x4. If you take a regular sedan on these roads, you are uninsured and liable for everything. But the real danger isn't the gravel. It's the rivers.
There are no bridges.
Correct. You have to ford glacial rivers. And the technique described in the guide is completely counterintuitive for most drivers.
My instinct, if I'm driving into a river, is to panic and floor it. Get to the other side as fast as possible.
And that is exactly how you drown your car. If you floor it, you splash water up into the air intake, the engine chokes, and you're stuck in freezing water.
So what's the trick?
You have to drive slow. You need to create a bow wave. You push a small, steady wave of water in front of your bumper. This creates a pocket of air behind the wave, right where your engine is. And rule number 1, never, ever switch gears in the water.
Why no shifting?
If you press the clutch, water can get between the pressure plate and the flywheel. You lose traction, you stop, and then the current takes you.
That is terrifying, just piloting a submarine across a river.
It's high stress. But then you turn the page in our source deck, and you go from this white-knuckle, adrenaline-fueled river crossing to a source from Blooming Joy Farm.
I loved this pivot. It was such a relief to read. We go from drowning engines to sheep farming.
It grounds the whole discussion. While the tourists are fighting the rivers, the shepherds are following this ancient seasonal rhythm.
And using some very specific tricks. I saw they use fresh pumpkin as a natural dewormer.
Yes, in the fall. The seeds apparently have natural deworming properties. It's this low-tech organic solution, but my favorite detail was the lambing kit.
The sweaters.
The sweaters. They take the sleeves of old wool sweaters and make tiny jackets for the lambs if they are born in the cold.
That image, a baby lamb wearing a recycled sweater sleeve, feels like the perfect counterweight to the massive geothermal plants and the industrial fishing fleets.
It reminds you that despite all the high-tech adaptation, there is still this backbone of care, just people taking care of animals in the cold.
So let's try to pull this all together. We've looked at high-tech tomatoes, the stock market of fish, elf-negotiated infrastructure. What does this all mean?
If you zoom out, the Icelandic method is this blend of extreme adaptation and deep respect. They use high-tech drilling to harness magma heat, but they pause construction for folklore. They automated their fisheries to save the economy, but they still have farmers knitting sweaters for lambs.
It's a balance between conquering nature and bowing down to it.
Exactly. But the provocative thought I'm left with goes back to that Embry-Riddle research we started with.
The melting glaciers.
Right. Iceland has built its modern identity and its power grid on the ice. But the ice is leaving. By the end of this century, the landscape will be fundamentally different. So the question is, will their culture of resilience and elf negotiation be enough to help them adapt when the physical source of their power, the glacier, is literally melting away?
That is the big question. Iceland has reinvented itself before, from herring to cod to tourism, but this might be their biggest test yet.
Indeed. It's one thing to adapt to the weather. It's another thing entirely to adapt to a new climate.
Well, on that note, I think I'm going to go look up a recipe for tomato beer. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the mechanics of Iceland. We hope you learned something new about how this incredible island actually functions. Thanks for joining us.